There are many themes in the film Dune. It's a film about war, love, but it's also a film about politics.
When we get to Arrakis, we'll face enormous danger.
What danger? Fremen? The desert?
Political danger.
This is a world of great houses, an emperor, religious orders, and an oppressed people, all clashing in their quest for autonomy and control. And it's the story of one individual whose understanding of power leads him to its summit. In this video, I want to look at how political power works in Dune, how it's used by Paul to rise from refugee to emperor, and the danger we all face when we fail to understand how that power works. I want to start here with this moment between Paul's father, Duke Leto, and Stilgar, a Fremen leader. It's a quiet conversation, but it reveals a lot about how power really works.
I believe your people and mine have much to offer one another.
You are outworlders. You come here for the spice, you take it, giving nothing in return.
That's true.
The first thing to note is that Leto is not trying to use brute force to get what he wants.
You dismissed my mother in her own house.
Come here. Kneel.
The voice that compels obedience, the control of important natural resources like spice, fearsome military power. Hard coercive force is a big part of how power works in the Dune universe. And as the leader of a great house, Duke Leto has soldiers and weapons at his command with which he could attempt to use brute force to compel the Fremen to do his will. But Leto, wise about power, knows that it's smarter to see if he can win support, or at least consent, from the people he now rules.
I know you've suffered at the hands of the Harkonnen. Name what you want. If it's in my power to grant, I'll give it and ask for nothing.
Leto understands that his power, the ability to have his wishes obeyed, is built on both coercive force and legitimacy, the belief that his authority is right and justified. It was Max Weber, often described as the father of sociology, that reintroduced the idea of legitimacy to modern thinking at the beginning of the 20th century. And it's common for new observers of politics to miss how important both of these factors are.
I'm sorry, but the UN must be firm with you. Let me see your whole palace, or else.
Or else what?
Or else we will be very, very angry with you. And we will write you a letter telling you how angry we are.
On one side, liberals sometimes ignore the importance of hard, coercive power, while others see only force as important and miss the importance of beliefs, consent, and persuasion. But the truth is, even with tyrants that appear to rule by force, legitimacy still matters. For while such a person can intimidate a few individuals with physical strength, to rule a large group or nation, he needs soldiers and supporters. And what makes these supporters loyal to him or her is certainly not the ruler's ability to intimidate them physically. And in fact, the Harkonnens' return to Arrakis is a good example of the limits of hard, coercive force.
Now that the spice fields have been secured, I strongly recommend bringing all troops out of Fremen territories. We're losing too many men to the desert.
Without any kind of legitimacy amongst the Fremen, without any kind of belief that their authority is right and justified, the Harkonnens face incredible difficulties. So we understand that power is built on coercive force and legitimacy. But back in the meeting with Stilgar, Paul can see that his father faces a problem, as Stilgar and the Fremen don't recognize Duke Leto's legitimacy.
I ask for this, do not seek our sieges, do not trespass in our lands. The desert was ours, long before you came, so come and dig your spice, but when you have it, go back to this side of the shield wall and leave the desert to the Fremen.
You will address the Duke as my lord or sire.
Gurney, just a moment.
Duke Leto is part of a powerful imperial order.
By the grace of Shaddam, fourth of House Carino, ascendant to the golden lion throne of Padisha, Emperor of the known universe, I stand before you as herald of the change.
As we'll see later, there's a complex arrangement of power behind this imperial order. But with its ceremony and ritual, we can also see that it's supported by what Max Weber called traditional legitimacy. The idea that the political order is valid because it has been there for a long time. Few regimes today are built purely on traditional legitimacy. But we can see its power from the way political systems, both old and new, will use ceremony and appeals to the past to cement their authority. But the problem for Leto is that this imperial order means nothing to the Fremen.
You will address the Duke as my lord or sire.
Gurney, just a moment.
Leto is smart enough to notice this, and instead tries to appeal to Fremen interests.
I cannot promise not to travel into the desert if duty compels me. But your sieges will be yours forever. And you will never be hunted while I govern here.
But unfortunately, it's a strategy that has little time to bear fruit. After escaping the invasion of the Harkonnens, Paul, with his mother, encounters the Fremen again. And, like in the last meeting, the difference between how legitimacy works in Paul's world and Fremen society is stark.
You talk like a leader, but the strongest leads.
We might call this martial legitimacy, the idea that authority belongs to the strongest fighter.
Fashi, the boy doesn't know our rule. There's no yielding under the Amtal rule. Only death is the test of that.
Paul wins this fight and acceptance to the Fremen community. At which point it becomes clear that his position is supported by another type of legitimacy. We can call this religious legitimacy, and we got the first hints of it when Paul and his family arrived on the planet.
They were pointing at us. What are they shouting?
Lisan al-Gaib. Voice from the outer world. It's their name for Messiah.
When Paul and his mother join the Fremen, Paul sees the potential of this type of legitimacy to help him.
Bene Gesserit propaganda has taken root. Some of them already think I'm their Messiah. Others, false prophet. I must sway the non-believers.
And when Jessica becomes the Reverend Mother, this is a strategy she uses to increase Paul's support amongst the Fremen.
You're right. If we want to protect your brother, we need all the Fremen to believe in the prophecy. We must convert the non-believers one by one. We need to start with the weaker ones, the vulnerable ones, the ones who fear us.
You can see religious legitimacy used in the political regimes of our universe, often operating in a similar way to traditional authority.
God save the king!
But in Dune, the religion is more political, more forward-looking.
The Lisan al-Gaib will change the face of Arrakis. He will bring back the trees, he will bring back a green paradise.
Stilgar and other Fremen hope Paul is the fulfillment of a prophecy that will transform the planet from a desert to a garden. This makes it more similar to the kind of legitimacy found in revolutionary movements. As well as this utopian vision, there's also a more short-term goal that Paul becomes emblematic of.
Then I will go further north.
The further north you go, the more likely it is you die.
Hinadrui uzulatha, Shiruk fafa. Isnata kiralak damri, Samaha. Hizoha dak huishi fremen kasi.
A green paradise for the planet and freedom from the Harkonnens, Paul symbolises both of these goals. We can call this ideological legitimacy, when people give political support to a regime because of a belief in the future world they believe it will create. Added to all these sources of authority, there is another type of legitimacy that Paul gains as the story progresses, what Max Weber called charismatic authority. The absolutely personal devotion and personal confidence in revelation, heroism, or other qualities of individual leadership, as exercised by the prophet, warlord, ruler, or party leader. Indeed, both prophecy and war build up Paul's charismatic legitimacy. He is effective in combat against the Harkonnens, and he appears to fulfill prophecies. Yet even as Paul gains legitimacy from these different sources, there is a tension.
So you don't believe in the Lisan al-Gaib?
We believe in Fremen.
Bilal Kaifa.
You want to control people? You tell them a Messiah will come. Then they'll wait for centuries.
After meeting Chani, Paul starts to resist being seen as a prophet. In fact, this becomes the central dramatic tension of the story.
They used to be friends. Now they're followers.
Muad'Dib, the prophet, Why is that a bad thing? Use it.
It's not that simple.
You have the power to avenge your father, and you're afraid to use it?
Spice opened my mind, Gurney. I can foresee things. If I go south, all my visions lead to horror. Billions of corpses scattered across the galaxy.
Although Paul resists, the pressure on him to take advantage of his religious support grows when the northern homes of the Fremen come under attack. And so, with a hope for visionary power, Paul relents to taking on the role fate seems to have in store for him.
Go south. Bring your people to safety. And then I will do what must be done.
As Paul's rise to power progresses, there is another story of legitimacy taking place, that of the Padishah Emperor. As a leader, he also wields hard coercive power in the form of the fearsome Sardaukar fighters. But, like a medieval European king, these forces are not enough to defeat the combined armies of his nobles. And this makes his legitimacy all the more important. We spoke earlier about how the Emperor is supported by traditional legitimacy, but his rule is also built on a deal that he will protect individual houses from attacks by others and will, in return for allegiance, respect their autonomy. This is somewhat similar to what Weber described as legal rational legitimacy, where power is supported by a belief in predictable law and rules. There are many virtues to this type of legitimacy, but unfortunately for the Emperor, if the fact he has broken the terms of this deal comes out, his legitimacy, and thus his power, is hugely weakened.
And should the great houses learn that your father was behind the liquidation of the Atreides, your father will face war and lose the throne.
Even for someone who wields strong coercive power, legitimacy remains vital. Paul agrees to go south, but unknown to Chani, he also decides to take the Water of Life, a deadly liquid extracted from the sandworms of the planet, hoping that it will give him clairvoyant visions that will help him defeat the Harkonnens. However, drinking the liquid almost kills Paul, and Chani is called to help. Chani realizes Paul has used her to strengthen his religious authority. It's a betrayal. From this point onward, changed by the Water of Life, Paul appears to lose his ambivalence about seeking power. And by the time he arrives at the War Council, we can see an unapologetic pursuit of it, using every type of legitimacy available to him.
If you wish to share your voice, you must take his place by defeating him and returning his water to the well.
You think I'm stupid enough to deprive myself of the best of us?
Take my life, Usul. It is the only way.
I'm pointing the way! Unala sot undau verzihi nefribit kumuni!
First, Paul claims martial legitimacy.
Is that okay?
Then we have religious legitimacy.
Hashisha chi.
Shidgim shari.
Saklakaid. Shuba hoki.
This is my father's ducal signet. I am Paul Muad'Dib Atreides, Duke of Arrakis! Eludi Dina Heshidani, Nelisan Al-Gaim, Rui Dimenaruk, Ashidi! Listen, Al-Gaim!
Once Paul has become undisputed leader of the Fremen, much of the rest of the story is about hard coercive power. And after all the missiles, sandworms, and hand-to-hand fighting, Paul still has one last enemy left to defeat.
There is a massed armada in orbit.
Paul has won the battle, but to gain full victory, he has to undermine the Emperor's legitimacy.
You're facing a full invasion, Fremen.
How can you be so sure the great houses are here for me? They may be curious to hear my side of the story, don't you think? I am Paul Atreides, son of Leto Atreides, Duke of Arrakis.
Paul's need for legitimacy also explains why he claims marriage to the Emperor's daughter, even if it means a betrayal of the woman he loves. And so, after a little hand-to-hand combat, Paul is the new emperor. So, where does that leave us? By understanding and harnessing various sources of legitimacy, Paul rises to the position of emperor. It's an exhilarating story, even though we've been warned it will lead to horrendous pain.
If I go south, all my visions lead to horror.
In fact, a warning was partly what the writer of Dune was trying to achieve with this story.
Don't trust leaders to always be right. I worked to create a leader in this book who would be really an attractive, charismatic person, for all the good reasons, not for any bad reasons. Then power comes to him. He makes decisions. Some of his decisions made for millions of people, millions upon millions of people, don't work out too well.
What Frank Herbert means here by decisions that don't work out well is a genocidal holy war, though we only get hints of that in these movies. Frank Herbert wanted to show how a leader comes to power, but do so in a way that seduced the audience into the process. And it works. I read the Dune books twice before realizing I was rooting for a Hitler. Even in the movies, where Chani's character is rewritten to oppose Paul, it's still easy to get caught up in the excitement, in the combat, the prophecies, and the politics. We start off observing the story of a hero, but by the end, we're cheering on a tyrant. Hey, thanks for watching. As you can probably tell, I love the Dune movies, so it was quite fun to put together. One thing to pick up on, you remember this guy? This is John Mearsheimer, an advocate of the international relations theory of realism, which, to my mind at least, focuses too much just on hard coercive power. Anyway, he's most famous at the moment for arguing Russia's invasion of Ukraine was actually the West's fault, and I actually made a reply to his argument, which also explains this idea of realism, which you can check out. And I think if you enjoyed this video, I think you would enjoy that.